What is the fourth dimension? Find out on this episode of Pushback.
Go, Jonny, go, go. Go, Jonny, go, go. Go, Jonny, go, go.
If you're concerned about the direction our culture is heading, then maybe it's time to push back.
Well, hello everyone. I'm Dr. Jonny, and this is another episode of Pushback. I want to talk about the fourth dimension, and what I'm referring to is the celebration this week of the 4th of July. And I believe it does actually bring a dimension not only to our lives and living in America and being Americans, but a dimension really in the history of the world. And I want to just touch base on what I love about my country and the purpose of this podcast in regards to what I see as the important aspects of engaging this culture and this grand experiment called the United States of America. It is July 4th, 1776. Something shifted, and I believe it not only shifted in the quasi-political world that was taking place at the time, not only shifted in regards to separating ourselves from a monarchy in Britain, but I believe it shifted something in the spirit as well. And I believe that there's a country that was established under God and his principles that has never been like it on the face of the planet. And starting on July 4th of this year, it'll be our 250th year of existence until July 4th of next year when we actually celebrate that birthday. It's the longest running democracy in history. And that is something worth celebrating. I often found myself being frustrated at times when I'm in a meeting either at work or even discussing things sometimes with the family, that sometimes we get focused on things that are reasons things won't work, when we really should be focused on why things could work. And I feel like at work sometimes, and even when we're planning things for the family, a lot of times we'll come up with an idea and then everyone will shoot it down and give reasons why it won't work. And what we should focus on, let's give some reasons why this could work or why this will work. And sometimes that gives a little bit more of a positive vibe to the conversations that are taking place. So when we look at our country, a lot of times we do focus on the things that haven't worked great. It hasn't been perfect. Nothing that involves human beings are going to be perfect. But what has worked well? What are the things that were implemented by the founding fathers that 250 years later, we are still celebrating? Sometimes we do have to take a step back and look at the enormity and the miraculousness of what took place in those first meetings in the Continental Congress and establishing the Constitution and the Bill of Rights and the things that were written and drafted at that time to try to make things so that they would run smoothly and with checks and with balances. It was such a critical, beautiful, God-inspired time of our country. Well, some things have worked. And it's interesting, even though it's not perfect, it really hasn't been replicated by other countries. And I don't think people would really argue that this is the greatest nation on earth. Many threaten to leave, but very few actually do. Because where else would they go? We have a country that's based on certain things, and we love to throw around the word freedom and independence and liberty. We use these words often, and they are the hallmark, the cornerstone of what we have established as a country. And that is worth celebrating. In fact, if I can just be completely blunt, we have a freedom to celebrate it. We have a freedom to celebrate, period, which is interesting. I believe worship time at church is time of celebration. We are celebrating who we are in Christ. And we have the freedom, We don't live in fear when we get up Sunday morning and Wednesday nights we don't live in fear about we're being persecuted or sneaking around. We can go boldly and we can celebrate who God is. We can celebrate anniversaries like the 250th year of our existence as a nation. We can freely celebrate these things. We can celebrate each other. We can celebrate milestones. We can celebrate the things that we believe. We can celebrate victories that we have achieved. We can even celebrate gay pride. It's not aligned with what we believe, but there's freedom in our country to celebrate those things, even though we don't all agree on the things that should be celebrated. Just like not everybody goes to church or sees the value in that. But that's our secret sauce as well, because even though we don't see it as the best for people, we recognize the fact that they have the freedom to celebrate it. And equally as important and equally baked into the cake of what is America is the freedom to protest. I know that there's been a lot of pushback even from conservatives regarding the protests in Los Angeles. It's hard to know exactly what they're about, but I'm guessing it has to do with the deportation that's taking place currently. And yes, it became unruly, and yes, it became violent, which I'll talk about in a second. But the right to protest, the right to be heard, the right to even go to the streets and peacefully protest is baked into the cake of what America is. And that should be celebrated. Even though it's not what we agree with or doesn't always make a lot of sense, they still have the freedom to protest. We had the freedom to protest men playing women's sports. I shared a podcast about going down to the Capitol and doing that. We protest against abortion. And yes, they have the right to protest against deportations, even though some of us believe that that's an appropriate action by our president and his administration. It wasn't a great week for Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, as he tried to downplay what was happening in his city this week and feeling like he didn't need help. He didn't need the National Guard. He didn't need Trump to intervene in any way. And then this week he had his hand out and said, well, on second thought, we could use some money. We could use some money to fix up all the looting and the rioting and the impact to small businesses in Los Angeles because of the violence that he was denying. But he has the freedom, and the people have the freedom to protest. And there are ways to engage. Talked about rallies, public discourse, social media like I'm doing right now. There's ways to engage these issues through donations, putting our money where our mouth is, the things that we believe in. And the most potent is the ballot box. Those are ways that we appropriately engage with society because that was given to us by our founding fathers of our country. But there's also ways not to engage, which was also demonstrated in Los Angeles over the last couple of weeks. Dangerous rhetoric, violence. I believe abstaining from voting is one of the most abhorrent things that somebody can do. Because that's all right. People had died and fought for the right for you to vote and cast your vote on what you think is best. And there's been something that's been sneaking into our society, and I'm sure you've noticed this. I call it forced celebration. Also not a way to engage. When baseball players are forced to wear gay pride merchandise on their bodies, when we're forced to celebrate, when we're forced to take holidays, when we're forced to try to quote unquote agree with somebody else, is actually contrary to what the founding fathers actually provided for us. So there's ways to engage, there's ways not to engage, there's ways to celebrate, there's ways to protest. That's part of who we are, and I want to celebrate that. I want to celebrate the aspect of the fact that even though we all come from different perspectives, we all have a place at the table to share our hearts. Now, with that being said, what's hard sometimes, and we've been noticing this in the conversation, especially in politics, is that we don't always get what we want. especially when we're dealing with the kingdom of this world. Isn't that the truth? It's the cornerstone of democracy, whether we like it or not, is that we can't always get what we want. And so the question is, compromise, is that an ugly word? Well, sometimes it is. Sometimes it isn't. But how does that work when we're representing the kingdom? Is compromise an ugly word? I have a dear friend who was very high in the political realm in Minnesota, and he was championing a marriage amendment bill that was bringing forth that marriage would be between one man and one woman. And he championed this and worked very hard on this. And I remember shortly after it didn't pass, I believe just by 1%. When it didn't pass, I was sitting with him in the hot tub, and we were chatting, and I was devastated for him. I looked at him and I said, how are you doing? Because you worked so hard for this, and then to have such a close defeat, like, how's your heart? Are you okay? And as calmly as he can be, he looked at me and said, you know what? You don't always get what we want or what we think is best. But we have to move on and fight the next battle. And he was so calm about it that it almost drove me crazy, because I respected him so much that day, because I felt like in my heart, like, he understands the realm in which he is in. And sometimes that requires compromise. Sometimes you don't always get what you want. And that's the reality of living in the kingdom of this world. But we're not really from that kingdom, are we? We talk about that a lot on this podcast. There's a kingdom of heaven, and kingdom of heaven has a standard. And we raise the standard. And it's unmovable because it's based on the constancy of Jesus Christ. He was the same yesterday, today, and forever. But we engage this world from the aspect of heaven towards earth. We talk about this so often, of being ambassadors of heaven, sent here to reproduce his culture here on this earth. That we are the culture setters. We're not victims of the culture. We're not subject to the culture. We set the culture. And so how does that work? How do we engage this world? Well, it says in 2 Timothy 1:7 that he hasn't given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and a sound mind. I love that verse, because we engage with rational thought and with passion, with love and honor towards those who we connect with. And that's been the hallmark of America for 250 years. I believe that it works the best when we actually engage from a place of love and honor with each other here on this earth, even though we don't always get what we want, even though it doesn't always turn out how we hope it would turn out. It's still the most effective and promising way that we engage the world as Americans. And we can't lose that culture, that what was given to us by the founding fathers, by engaging in fear, by engaging in weakness, by engaging in irrational or violent or extreme anger or behavior. It's countercultural to what was created and birthed in us as a nation, and it's countercultural to what heaven has sent us here to do. But for whatever reason, and this has been more so over just the last decade of living here as an American, is that we get so angry with those that disagree with us. And the rhetoric has ramped up and become so hot-headed and so personal because we've lost the ultimate perspective on the fourth dimension, the July 4th dimension. What that actually brings to us, what was actually fought for, what was actually purchased for us, what was dreamed over for us, what was written down for us, all of those things, because we've lost that perspective, that fourth dimension perspective, what July 4th brings to us as a culture, we've lost it. And so all we do is we see the other side, in quotes, as the enemy, and we become angry. You see, but we are a nation under God, built on his principles, but also his ways and his perspective. Isn't that beautiful? I think that's why this works. is because whether you believe in God or not, I believe the fact that it was built on his principle and his ways has actually allowed us to thrive as a nation and to be successful as a nation. But I want to offer you, I believe, the most important perspective on what we are doing here as American citizens and ambassadors of heaven, as both. And it's Ephesians 6:12. I think this is one of the most critical, important verses that we could actually lean into in all of Scripture. And this is what it says. This is the NIV version. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil, listen to this, in the heavenly places, or in the heavenly realms. New King James Version says, for we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this age, against spiritual hosts of wickedness in the heavenly places. My friends, I believe this is one of the most defining perspective verses that we could possibly look at. Because we must engage in the kingdom of this world. This is what this podcast is about. We can't bury our head in the sand. We can't just wait for Jesus to return. That's not why we're here. We're here to engage this world. Yes, even politics, like this podcast does. But we engage with love and honor and with a sound mind, and even at times, compromise. At the same time, the battle or the wrestle or the struggle, it says, isn't with those people that we disagree with. It's never flesh and blood. It's not the Democrat Party. It's not the president. It's not the person down the street who has a sign in their yard. It's none of those people, but it's principalities and powers and evil in the heavenly realm. And with that battle, there is no compromise. And we can't be complacent. It's critical that we understand our positioning here as ambassadors and who we're actually fighting against. I think it would make us a little less angry and would also give us a better perspective on where to point our sword. See, we have freedom in our country to engage, to mature, and to sharpen our spiritual swords for battle. And I say spiritual swords because we are spiritual people sent by God to do his work here on this earth. And it requires a level of maturity in the spirit to actually engage the principalities and the powers and the evil in the heavenly realm. Because if we don't do it, who's going to do it? It's been handed to the church. And if the church sets it down, if the church just becomes involuted, if the church goes into the fetal position and just waits for Jesus to come back, then guess who wins? The principalities and the powers and the evils in the heavenly realms. They're the ones who are influencing. They're the ones that we get so frustrated with because we see evil on the earth. It's the manifestation of the battle in which we're in. And we need to have spiritual eyes. Our spiritual eyes need to open. We need to be able to see the things in the spirit so that we know how to engage. And in order to do that, we have to mature in the spirit. We don't send 8-year-olds into battle. No, we send the mature soldier into battle. The mature soldier with the perspective to fight and sacrifice. Let me say that again. The mature soldier has the perspective to fight and sacrifice. They know who they're engaged with, they know who they're fighting, and they know why. That's the spiritually mature that I believe heaven is calling us to be. We need to be spiritually mature to engage our spirit in battle. And next podcast, I'm going to talk about going a little bit deeper in the spirit because our spirit needs to be aware. We need to be aware of what's happening so that we can take on these big and dark things. I just talked to my wife today about abortion again. I believe it's maybe the darkest realm when we are killing our own babies and our children. I'm not sure there's anything darker on the earth. It's a dark, evil realm that's being fought in the heavenly places. And I can run for office. You can run for office. We can try to make legislation regarding this. We can hope Roe v. Wade gets overturned. We can do all of those things, and those are all important, humongous steps towards reconciliation of our country. But make no mistake about it, it's a battle in the spiritual realm. And that's where things fall off. That's where things are won, where things are shifted. And that's what we need to have eyes to see. That's what he's calling us to be spiritual beings here on this earth, to see what needs to be done so that we can be activated in the name of Jesus to accomplish what he sent us to do. Do you have faith for that? I am so grateful to be living in the United States. I'm so grateful to be raising my children in Minnesota, despite all of its problems, despite all of its issues that we have here in this state and in this country. It's still the best place on the earth. And I can still stand before you in front of this microphone with courage, without fear, being able to share my mind and my perspective on things. And I am so grateful to those who paid the ultimate price, for those people that paid and with their blood to provide that for me. And I will not take that for granted. I don't take for granted one drop of blood that Jesus shed for me that allows me to operate with spiritual eyes to see the things that we need to see. And I want to thank the founding fathers who heeded heaven when they actually created the documents of this country. I believe they actually went to heaven to find out what they should do and what they should write. And I believe it was inspired with a divine purpose. That's what I believe. And I am so grateful. I'm going to celebrate the 4th of July with a full and encouraged heart because of what they've all provided for me and my family. And I wish that for you as well. Have a happy 4th of July weekend. Celebrate it up good. Our country is worth celebrating. That is for sure. Hey, last time I mentioned the Famology podcast. On social media, you can find, we're beginning to talk about that, beginning to receive some questions already. If you're interested in leaving a question for Dr. Jonny and my wife, Amy, we have tons of experience in family ministry, in the medical realm, as well as raising 8 children of our own, and my wife homeschooling for over 25 years. We have a lot of experience and perspective on family, marriage, and parenting. And so we are starting the Famology podcast September 3rd. We're going to release them on Wednesdays. So look for that. There's a countdown going down until we lead to that. But if you're interested in leaving a question for us, you can go to gofam.org and go into the comment section or the contact us section and leave those questions for us, and we will entertain that for one of our episodes for Famology. So please look for more information because that is coming soon. Super excited to do that with my wife, Amy. Thank you for connecting with this podcast again this week, and I look so forward to connecting with you again next week. So with that being said, let's go together now to set and shape the culture.